Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hello, welcome to the Figure It Out cast for August 2022. Today's going to be a little bit of a weird episode, everybody, because Rob is not going to be here, I don't think, for the entirety of this, because his power went out again. You know, this happened to him last month during part of the recording, and then it came back, so maybe that'll change, but right now, like, we just found out about this, like, right before we were recording, but, yeah. So, let me get my little spiel out of the way here. First of all, thank you very much for tuning in. If you guys could do me a favor, drop a like, comment, subscribe, as always appreciated. Their subjects for this video will be listed in the description. You can click around if you want to do that. This is a Patreon-backed podcast, and if you support the channel, you can get early access to it. You can get shout-outs on it. You can pick subjects on it. You can even be on it. And speaking of that, we've got Abdullah. What up, man?
Hey, I'm doing okay. It's been a crazy day for everybody today.
Yeah, it really has. Like, Abdullah barely was able to join us. He was having some bad luck, but he has made it through so that it's not just my boring ass here. We can actually, you know, have a conversation, which is always good. So, I understand. I understand you're on a bit of a time crunch, so we'll just get into this. For your subject this month, we were kind of kicking around an idea, and ironically, it was Rob's idea, who is not here to talk about it because he sucks. And so basically, here's what he wrote. A hypothetical game CEO. Like, what 3 things would you change for a retro console to make it more successful? Now, before I give my answer to this, I do want to say that I interpreted this 2 different ways, but I never really had a chance to ask Rob before he lost power. One would be the idea that what, you know, console would you go back and change if you had like a time machine? And the other, and we're going to give a shout out here to a guy named Spencer Peryear, because he also is at the level in which he gets to pick a subject, but he didn't have any ideas this month. So I'm just kind of fusing it into this. The other interpretation of this would be if you were the CEO of some sort of company now dealing with retro stuff, as we see, you know, there's a lot of retro releases still for things like the NES or the Dreamcast, whatever. What changes would you make to make those successful as well, or more successful, and how I guess you would define success?
So I'll start off with this, and I'm gonna give a shout out. Oh, it's not really a shout out, everybody knows this console, but I happened to, when I was thinking of it, because as you know, we're jumping around with ideas, so, and have a lot of time to think about one specifically. I'm not sure if I have even 3 things, but I will give a time machine, because, you know, I love this company a lot, and you probably love this company way more than anybody else, but it's Sega.
Yeah,
so
that's a given.
I were to, yeah, that's a given, of course. So if I were to go back in time, I would go to the time where, you know, the success of the Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
And after the success of the Genesis, everything was a downfall for Sega. No matter how great the Dreamcast was, it just couldn't catch up to whatever mistakes happened. So I wouldn't do what they did with the Saturn. So to me, I actually love the Sega Saturn, and I did my best to collect as many games for it as possible. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
So what suggestions would you make, or just other than showing up, kicking their asses, and saying don't make the Saturn?
Yeah, so I actually thought the voice cut out. That's why I wasn't sure. All right,
No,
so,
I was just listening.
All right, cool. Because you know the situation. So the first thing I would say is that early launch that Sega did. Now, I know the Saturn was successful in Japan and whatever, but we all know Japan is like its own world and its own kind of separate entity, in a sense. So I wouldn't do what they did with in terms of the Sega Saturn release, the Saturn release, as you're aware of it, that they did. That probably kicked them back so hard with how the Saturn did. Number 2, now I'm not really let's say, I don't have much knowledge in how things worked, not a lot of the history behind Because I know that Sega, they did the Sega CD and they did the 32X and all that stuff, and then the Saturn came along, and it just caused consumers to be so confused on what do I buy? Do I buy? And it caused a lot of confusion. So probably the roots of this should begin by not making things like this Sega CD and 32X, but just putting all of that effort and power into the new console. That would have saved them so much from the trouble and so much from the confusion with the common consumer. Probably anybody who's into gaming or probably knowledgeable about gaming would understand that, but at that point in the 90s, if I wasn't there, but I can understand that that wasn't really common. People didn't really know these things so much that would cause a lot of confusion. Number 3 is I'm aware of how much the Sega Saturn it's got power, but it's, as far as I remember, the cost of making a single game for it is quite expensive as compared to things like the PlayStation. So that would be something people would work on. Maybe you'd lessen the power and just make it feasible. So I'm not really aware of... There's so many things that limited the Saturn, but those complications are one of the biggest things that probably Sega screwed up in. And so these are things I would try to... If I were back then... And I'm also aware that there has been, if I'm not mistaken, there was some feud between Sega of Japan and the US.
Yes, that's correct.
Correct me if I'm
No,
yeah.
you're right. You're right.
So that would have probably caused a problem, because you see, when things are not in one single line or things are not in one united front, there's a problem, as it's always is. So we try to work on that. Keep going on with the Genesis. Nothing's gonna bite you. Nintendo is not gonna come and destroy you. You already built a great name with the Genesis. You overtook the Super Nintendo for a while. You can do it. Don't rush. Don't get crazy. That life support that the Sega Genesis had was crazy, and top it up with the Saturn, the cost price for all of those things, probably would have saved them a lot of trouble if they just thought about those simple things instead of just throwing things out there. So that would be my take on it. That's why I chose the Saturn, because I believe it's kind of the Wii U, quote unquote, of that era. Or more like the Saturn is the Wii U, or the Wii U of the Saturn of this era.
Right. It is fascinating. So it's hard to dive into this without giving a full history lesson, and I think everyone would predictably come at me and be like, "You're going to talk about Sega mistakes," and logically I should, because I think kind of objectively that's history's most obvious answer, is how different Sega would have been if they hadn't made all the mistakes of releasing certain things. Now, I like to get into the minutia of like why they released it the way they did. But the overall big picture, yeah, they shouldn't have divided their company so much. They shouldn't have done the 32X is the obvious answer. They shouldn't necessarily have done the Sega CD in hindsight, and they most certainly should not have handled the Saturn the way they did. I completely agree. But, you could talk about what the true original sin of Sega is. I would actually say it goes a little further back to the SG-1000 decision and how they released that and the SC-3000, which was their home computer version, on the same day. And they also released it the same day as the Famicom, and they didn't give it a whole lot of great support. So they got blown out of the water. Most people had never even heard of Sega's first console. That original sin...
Everybody thinks it's the Master System, usually. If they even know the Master System.
Exactly.
Genesis.
Hell, I would say most people in North America would just assume that Genesis is Sega's first console. But that's my point. The original, there's always a sin that eventually, creates this cascading effect that does all this stuff. That's kind of how history works. So if I was going to talk about Sega, I think it would actually be in that vein. But I'm actually going to surprise you. That's not who I'm going to be talking about, because it's too obvious for me.
If I may jump on a point in the
Sure,
Saturn,
go for it.
I would throw this out there, and I don't know if you agree with me or not, but what they did with the Genesis and the success they had on it, as you said, how history works, had they managed the success of the Genesis well, would have probably hid all of their past mistakes, because now they did something right and they didn't continue with that model. The Saturn was the tipping point that threw them out. It was the final straw that killed Sega, and whatever they tried to do, while trying to save up from the mistake, was just impossible. The Dreamcast, Well, I mean, it's a given in your case about the Dreamcast and how great it is, right? And
Yeah.
how powerful console it is. But no matter what the Dreamcast was, it just couldn't handle what Sega already did. And I believe the Saturn was the tipping point. As much as I love the Saturn, I can understand that it was the downfall, the final straw that probably killed Sega. So they could have saved themselves by appropriately releasing the Saturn and continuing on with the success that they did with the Genesis. What they did with the Genesis was amazing and probably covered up whatever they did before, but they just couldn't do that well. The 32X was a big mistake. The Sega CD, I'm not really sure about that. I'm not aware a lot of the Sega CD, but I do know that the Saturn probably was the final straw, the last sentence, the final final tipping point. That's where everything started going downhill, and there's no going up from there.
So, but okay, to put this in like terms of a ship, like let's pretend it's the Titanic for a second. You keep using the phrase tipping point. That would be where like, the bow is underwater, the stern has risen up, it's way too late to save it. But we got to analyze what that iceberg was in the first place. And I would say
All
I
these
agree
things
with
combined,
you.
maybe.
Right, of course. But the iceberg in this case, I would argue, is certain decisions that got them a little too high on the Genesis, thus leading to the Sega CD and the 32X. If you ask me, honestly, the decision Sega made that was a little too knee jerk was, if you remember history, the Genesis came out, or Mega Drive came out 2 years before the Super Nintendo. It wasn't really meant to compete with a console that didn't exist. It was actually meant to compete with the NES and in Japan the PC Engine, and it was supposed to be like the powerful one of the three. But inevitably Nintendo made the Super Nintendo. So when that, in the American perspective anyway, it just looked like, okay, the console war is Genesis versus SNES. That's how it was presented over here.
That's how history would show.
Yes, that's how history remembers it. But the thing is about that the Genesis objectively was not as technologically capable as the Super Nintendo. I mean, an extra 2 years of development has that effect. Hence the whole blast processing joke that kind of came of that. So Sega's solution to this initially was, hey, blast processing. We'll talk about how much faster it is, because like technically it was, but that wasn't really noticeable in performance. The Sega CD was their knee-jerk reaction to try and compensate for the Super Nintendo's extra abilities. But while that seemed good on paper, you have this new technology that's interesting. You have this massive Genesis install base. You have the capabilities that would come with a CD. So, the extra music and the videos and all that sort of stuff if you wanted it. You would also have the potential value benefit to the customer of, hey, you get a CD player, which back then was actually surprisingly uncommon. And potentially you can save money on the games because discs are infinitely cheaper to produce than cartridges. This was probably everything that was in their mind, but they didn't really account for all the negatives, mostly the fact that the console itself would be so much more expensive. It absolutely required the Genesis to function, and ultimately the game library for it was at best mediocre. That stigma, though, they should have learned from that. They shouldn't have done it, but they should have learned from it once they did it. They didn't. And that's where the 32X inevitably comes in as a knee-jerk reaction from the Jaguar, and you know the rest. Like I said, that's the iceberg. The tipping point, as you phrase it, is the Saturn. And even though the Saturn was great, it was nothing but mistakes that somehow cobbled together into a cool console that was not successful. Now, do you have anything else to say on the Sega bit?
No, I think we covered almost everything. I mean, it'd take a whole podcast to talk about what crazy mistakes Sega did, but
I agree. So we'll try and keep it consolidated for everybody. So I'll give
that's
my
pretty much the gist of it.
Yeah, I'll give my answer to this, because believe it or not, that's not my answer. Even though that's the most obvious one, I'll throw out another one. The other one I would go back and change, and I don't think this gets talked about all that much, is Nintendo and Sony trying to cut a deal together. Specifically, Nintendo's cooperation. All right, so here's the little history lesson for everybody. The Famicom, which we mentioned before, is the NES. It comes out in Japan and a Sony engineer named Ken Kutaragi, who would eventually make the PlayStation 1, 2, and 3. He basically got it and wasn't impressed by the sound technology, so he developed new chips and went to Sony with them, and they went to Nintendo and said, like, do you like these chips? And they were like, yeah, this is great. And they put that in the Super Nintendo. Okay, that's in there. That happened. That deal resulted in the infamous Nintendo PlayStation debacle, the prototype, which, you know, I've had access to in the past, which would be the first thing ever called PlayStation. Now, that's the whole history of that deal is an incredibly long story, but the highlights are basically that the terms of their original deal from 1988 would have meant that Nintendo would get no money off of any disc-based game content. And they could not stop Sony from producing basically legal, licensed, authentic Super Nintendo / Super Famicom consoles that they themselves would get no money on. So it was a whole big debacle. Now, the result of that whole situation, obviously the two of them didn't make this console together. It never saw the light of day. But while we have the jokes about, you know, Sega barely got anything out of it, they just got to see their competitors go through the mud. They also got Sony developed some Sega CD games, ironically. That was what Sega got out of it. Philips famously got the Zelda Unholy Triforce as well as Hotel Mario to be legally licensed for that platform. But the other two, Sony went on to make the PlayStation that we all know and is a brand that is obviously super popular and is still around to this day. And then at the same time, Nintendo went off into a corner, and that corner led to some odd decisions. And that's where I want to focus, because if you think about it, the direct result of what Nintendo did meant that was part of, not the entire, but part of the reason the Nintendo 64 did not use discs, because they were so fed up with the technology and the format and everything that had existed through that, they didn't really want to deal with it again. They also considered cartridges to be tried and true. They were still afraid of piracy, and to their credit, at that point in time, when the N64 was in development, every single CD-based console, not that there had been many at that point, but every single one that had ever been released was considered a failure. So Nintendo looked at it like, well, why would you do that? But that decision also had consequences. It meant that a lot of developers looked at Nintendo, who had been loyal to them from the NES and the SNES, and said, I don't want to work on your hardware because cartridges are too expensive, whereas the PS1 is super cheap to develop for. It's also, the disc printing is super cheap. We make way more money on a successful PS1 game. Theoretically, you would on a Saturn game as well, but it was so much more expensive and difficult to program for that it wasn't necessarily worth the effort. Sega's mistakes, which we alluded to before, and Nintendo's mistakes, which I'm talking about now, eventually created their biggest competition ever in the form of the PlayStation. So, not to focus so much on the Sega side, but to focus on Nintendo's side, that decision to say, hey, yeah, Sony, put your chips in the Super Nintendo, eventually created the company that would knock them out of relevance. I mean, think about what happened after that. After the N64, Nintendo finally accepted, you know, discs with the GameCube, but even then, their image of... Yeah, their image of, like, you're a powerhouse, you're taken seriously, was kind of gone. I mean, people forget that the GameCube was not that big of a success. In the 6th generation, it landed in 3rd place out of 5. And that's if you include the new one. And if you don't include the new one, it comes in, you know, still comes in 3rd, only beating out the Dreamcast. But losing to the Xbox, a brand new thing that had never existed before, still outperformed them, because people weren't really that interested in Nintendo stuff at that point. It was a very weird era. I remember that pretty well. And that decision of the GameCube not doing well, despite Nintendo actually putting a lot of effort into it, and I want to be very clear, the GameCube is an amazing console. Despite all the effort they put into it, they said that didn't work. What did they do? They made the Wii, which was just a GameCube on steroids and basically a motion controller. That's what they did. And ever since, they have followed this model of, we're going to be intentionally one generation behind technologically. That decision, if you ask me, the iceberg of that goes back to that decision to cooperate with Sony when they never should have done that.
I would definitely agree with that point. See, the thing is, uh, this specific thing. Now, when I was talking about Sega, it would have changed the course of Sega. But what you said, had it happened, would have not just changed the course of Nintendo or Sony, would have changed the course of the whole gaming community as we know it right now.
Oh yeah, the whole industry would be different. Like imagine a world where Ken Kutaragi, he's at the store where he bought that Famicom in real life, and instead in our version of history, he looks at the Famicom, he's like, whatever, and just walks away and doesn't buy it. Imagine if like the day he went to get that, he just forgot to bring any money. You know, like how different history would be. And for the record, I'm not saying history would be better. I want this very clear. Where this hypothetical is, I am the CEO of Nintendo. What would I go back and change? That's the scenario if I'm the CEO of a company. As a gamer and as a fan, I'm not saying this is a better situation. Whereas I would argue the Sega change would be better. This probably not, to be totally honest. But if I literally work at Nintendo, then yeah, this would be more of a solution.
Well, yeah, definitely that would have changed, as I told you, the course of gaming. When you're talking from the Nintendo side of it, like imagine a world where you have the, as you said, Nintendo has. I can see that quite well. I mean, I haven't lived in that era, let alone not even lived in the U.S. to know how much of an impact that is. But I can clearly, from reading history and analyzing things, you could really understand that. As you clearly said, the way the image that Nintendo has now, like I have a couple of people I know within the gaming community. Whenever I mention Nintendo, it's like said, okay, so you're not really a serious gamer. Say that to somebody in say 1990. Nintendo was gaming. That was what gaming was defined as. It was Nintendo. To the point where, as everybody knows, would refer to it as a video game. They would refer to it as a Nintendo. Given the course of what Nintendo could have done, now we know what would happen at this point of time if that decision was made that they would collaborate, but it didn't, and this is what we got. It goes way back, and it's a huge impact. It's like I just can't find a way to describe how
it's literally it's time travel paradox, because you also don't know what other good things came of it. Like, to Sony's credit, they were very good at pushing technology forward. You know, Nintendo famously held their, they held their feet to the, back. They were not trying to push that much. Sega was, but even independently, they made horribly incompetent decisions. And most of the reason they tried so hard with, say, the Dreamcast was directly to try and defeat Sony, which they had given up trying to defeat Nintendo, at least in the technological realm, because they didn't have to. Microsoft really only entered because they were concerned about Sony's eventual domination of the living room. These are all things, every single, and the technology that came with that. I mean, you look at it now, we constantly are pushing the graphical edge of technology, but that, while graphics, if you will, was always important, hence the whole concept of the bit wars, whatever, and technological advancement was always important. I'm not saying it wasn't. I do feel that Sony, being a technological conglomerate first, definitely pushed it more rapidly than it probably would have gone. So again, I'm not saying this version of history is better, just that if I work at Nintendo in this particular scenario that Rob wrote, that's what I would choose. But we've kind of did your / Rob's version of it. Let's do the Spencer per year version of it, which was, okay, it's currently 2022. There are retro games still coming out for the NES, the Dreamcast, whatever. If you were suddenly one of those guys like Josh Prod, who does all these Dreamcast releases, what kind of thing might you do to kind of make those a little more successful? I don't know if you can make them any less niche, but do you have any ideas? What would you do?
If I were the CEO of these companies that release homebrew games?
Yeah, for retro consoles specifically.
That's very interesting, because you see those. The thing is, those games have their like a good fan base, a stable one. Probably maybe not a huge fan base in terms of like a worldwide fan base, but it's a fan base within the gaming community itself. Um, One thing I would say now, the thing is because I don't follow a lot about those homebrew games, I'm just aware of them. I would say if I were the CEO, uh, is that's quite tough. But I would argue for one thing is to try to work on these games and have them set in some sort of have them include some sort of accessories with them or accessories within them that might actually enhance a console in a certain sense. Now, I know this is a weird thing to say, but it's kind of the only thing on the top of my head to think about when releasing such.
Do you mean like a special controller or something?
It could be that. It could be things like the game itself could you could include some sort of a cable to enhance the quality of the console to make it more appealing. People who say I can play this in high def. I don't need to plug in my NES to the AV cable. Now I know some companies have made specific cables for that, and there's a lot to talk about when it comes to this. But if those were included within the games itself, within the games themselves, maybe it would boost sales in terms that people would actually have the more incentive to buy rather than just play those games. Now, the first thing I thought maybe, well, it's kind of pointless to say release it on other platforms. That would just negate the whole question. So I was trying to think within the bubble of using the console itself. Maybe something, some sort of enhancement within those games that would actually boost the console in a sense or create some sort of appeal to it. As I told you, as you said, like special controls was one thing on top of my head, a special cable HDMI thing. Perhaps bundle it with those games in case of in the physical releases. That would actually create more incentive to buy. Maybe some people would buy them for the cables and actually enjoy the game and want to buy more of it.
Um, okay. What I would probably do is first of all, everybody has to understand like how niche these are. Like I cover all the Dreamcast releases, so I talk to a lot of these guys. So the truth is, they usually don't make more than like 3,000 copies of a new Dreamcast game, just because that's pretty much as they expect to sell. So it's the goal should be to expand that base. Now that's rather challenging, and I've seen some tactics like there's an occasionally they'll take an old indie release that came out a few years ago, because the indie scene has been around for like 20 years at this point, as insane as that is. And they'll like go back and find the original publisher and be like, hey, we want to buy the rights to your game and the source code, and we'll make a couple changes, and we'll include something. Like there's a game called Hermes that came out for the Dreamcast, I want to say in like 2015 or something. I don't even remember. I did a video on it at the time, and they Video Games New York just got a hold of that. They got the code. They decided, okay, we're going to make some bug changes. They fixed some stuff here and there. And to your credit, they talked about accessories. They released a special edition VMU that could only be bought with that version of the game. So that's a kind of a nice thing to boost sales here and there. But if you want to make the overall thing a little better, I would like to see some uniformity between, because there's a bunch of people doing Dreamcast indies now specifically, but there's not a whole lot of collaboration between them. They're essentially competitors, but that's just like nitpicking stuff. But in a more wide sense, I think it would be interesting to see a greater appeal to current relevant indie developers. Now, these games that come out are usually, as you put it, homebrews. There's just somebody who's passionate about it and they just do it for one reason or another. But there is occasionally a game that's actually kind of market relevant that gets on there. Like the last one for the Dreamcast specifically was Volgar the Viking, but that was kind of a special case. What I would like to see is there's a lot of people making indie games for, obviously, for platform like the PC via Steam, but then they're on the Xbox One or the Xbox Series X, PS4, PS5, the Switch, etc. Why aren't we getting versions of those, depending on the game, of course? I mean, technology is and budget is a factor, but there are some where you just go like, why isn't this on the Dreamcast? Like I was in Portugal not too long ago. I did voiceover for a game over there, and I was talking to the guy because he was, what games he's working on. I was like, have you ever thought about bringing in the Dreamcast? He's like, can you even do that? Like, he's like, technologically, hell yeah, we could. But he's like, I thought Sega would like come at us. And I'm like, no, dude, it's like completely license free. You can just do it. So I feel like there would be a little bit more upward momentum if you were approaching some indie developers and trying to get them to bring their games over to that particular system. And the same kind of applies to, I mean, there's still new Genesis games that come out. I think it it just depends on the goal, because it feels non-uniform. And I think the most successful Genesis one recently was Paprium. I don't know if you ever played that. It was, those guys went out of their way to make the most technologically capable game ever produced for the Genesis. It seemed like it shouldn't have worked, and it did. And it turns out to be this like amazing game that pushes the Genesis more than Sega ever did. So that's another factor that you have to figure out, is like, what era are we in technologically, and can you do that? Like, you can budget a current indie development team to push the Genesis to its maximum. That's not a big deal because the technology's so old. But the Dreamcast is a different story. You still have to budget it to something that's way under what the Dreamcast is capable of doing. And I feel like as time goes on, maybe you'll be able to push those some more as well. I guess all I'm trying to say with all of this is there's little things here and there you could probably do to make any one individual retro game scene more successful. But at the end of the day, the problem will always be install base, because the standard business model for a game console was, you try to make these good games so that people go out and they buy your consoles. Well, Sega stopped making Dreamcast, so it doesn't matter if the greatest game ever produced ever turns out to be a Dreamcast indie game that is exclusive to the system. It will not make new Dreamcasts exist. So that kind of changes the model. So the question is, what do you do about that? And sadly, I don't know if there is an answer necessarily. It's just, I think you just cater to your install base, and as long as you do that, you're always going to have the budget limitation. So if you have to work within those realities, those parameters, all you can do is kind of work around the edges. And my big solution to that would be find more indie devs who are willing to bring the game over to the Dreamcast if it is technologically capable of doing so, with the full understanding of how many units they can sell, because there are a lot of games where they could make money on that, especially if the game is already completed. It's just a matter of kind of porting the source code, if you will. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, as you said, there's so many limitations when it comes to this matter. Especially that this, as you said, like a niche kind of market isn't really global. So it's kind of tough to think about. It was kind of tough for me even to think about what to do about this. But overall, there are a couple of things that could be done. Like maybe the thing what you mentioned, what I mentioned, that could be done. Probably maybe if Rob was here, give more suggestions. I'm not sure, but as you said, it's hard to think about what you could do with this, because it is indeed a very select, specific market.
Yeah, but there is one kind of upswing to this, which is because of the advancement of things like EverDrives and things like ODEs. It's ironically kind of made these games more accessible, because now indie devs can start selling the digital versions of their games. Like, I've seen certain websites where you can buy the new Dreamcast game physically, but they'll just send you the file if you want to buy it digitally, and you can install it on your ODE, which is kind of ironic for a physical media console, but it does allow more people access to the games. And because you are saving consoles that have dead disk drives or whatever, that does kind of, in a weird way, bring more of them back into the market for people to play, because it's less likely that they'll die out. Do you know what I mean? Again, that's not really a solution. It's more of just kind of an observation as to what's going on right now at this moment in history. So it's hard to say we would go back and change things. I think how I would change things right now, like I said, find more indie devs and get them on board with projects. That would be my one. If we're going to shorten this all the way down to something, that's how I would boil it down.
That's pretty direct.
Yeah.
Pretty direct so far.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, all right. I think that's good. Spencer, thank you very much for that little twist on that. Abdullah, obviously, thank you for your being here and taking over for Rob because Rob sucks. But yeah.
Pleasure as always.
All right. So now, guys, we're going to do a round of shout outs. The following people are all Patreon backers. They are at the tier in which they get a shout out. You can be one of them at any time. The information is in the description. We've got Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, Tim Inman, and Trey Wagner. Once again, that is Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, Tim Inman, and Trey Wagner. Thank you so much. Okay, and we are back. Rob remains not alive or whatever's wrong with him. He has power issues, and that sucks for him. But whatever, it's going to be so much better now because now it's just Joseph, and Joseph's so cool. Hi, Joseph.
Hey, Adam.
So this is what
weird. This is like the third month in a row Rob has not been able to be here when I've been here.
Yeah, I feel
Second
like
month in a row for power.
Yeah, I feel like something's up, man. Either he's causing problems or he's forgetting to pay his power bill. I don't know what's going on exactly, but yeah, or just the universe just hates him, that's also very possible. But yeah, we hope his electricity comes back and that he's safer or whatever. But in the meantime, I mean, honestly, the show's kind of better without him. I think you should take over. You're much cooler. So yeah. So yeah, as always, you get to pick a subject, but we kind of went with I think I coined the term subject chop suey because
you did.
I like the idea because Joseph had some thoughts on stuff we said in the month before, but he wasn't able to contribute to. So he wants to do that, and then we'll kind of jump into something else, and it'll make sense. But yeah, do you want to just take point?
Sure. So last week when I was listening, but not last week, last month when I was listening to the podcast after we talked, I was a little bit shocked to find that you, Abdullah, and Rob were talking about the Steam Deck again.
That we were.
Yeah, especially since none of you actually have one, and oddly enough, I have one, and I did not suggest that topic last week. Last month. Why do I keep? My brain keep thinking.
I don't know. It's fine. It's been a long day for everybody.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, first things first. I just want to point out now that if you're someone who's interested in PC gaming at all and likes handheld gaming and don't mind the whole bit where you can only do digital games, so basically not you, Adam.
Yep.
The Steam Deck is great. I love this thing so much. I mean, I've been basically maybe not every single night, but a lot of times I just feel like I want to play a game that usually I would be stuck at my PC. But I sat in my chair all day because I work from home and I work at a computer all day. I'm going to go lay down and play a game. I'll go ahead and do that, and like you guys said, it's great to hold. For the most part, I haven't run into too many issues with most of the stuff I've thrown at it. I think the worst issue I've had is that a couple of games that Valve flat out says is this is unsupported right now, we don't think it works. Had a couple of issues, and the battery life, if you're playing something like a AAA game that's anything remotely recent, is a bit not great. So if I'm playing Elden Ring, I'll get maybe an hour and a half out of it. Which, I mean, playing Elden Ring on a handheld, you had to give somewhere. But I also noticed that you guys were talking about how the position of the Steam Deck in the market, and one thing that I would like to bring up. I know you guys concluded that the Steam Deck is not going to be a Switch killer. And even though Rob was mentioning that it seemed that their reveal seemed perfectly timed to be hey, so Nintendo is releasing this Switch OLED and you're all disappointed. Here's a powerful handheld that you could also dock to a TV eventually once you buy a dock or once we make a dock. So he thought that was kind of trying to position itself against the Switch. The only real thing with that I would like to point out is that that's not really what Valve is trying to do here. Generally, what Valve's main competition hardware-wise with the Steam Deck is that stuff like the Aya Neo and those other Windows portables that like go for like anywhere from like $1,000 to like $1,500 or something like that. And their main goal is mostly trying to bash it into PC gamers' heads that, hey, look, Linux works for gaming computers now. You don't necessarily need to buy Windows. And they're mostly trying to do that because Microsoft in the past has made some moves that were like trying to like basically lock out third-party programs that aren't coming from like their store off of Windows, and then backed off when there was like, you know, big outcries on it. But they've floated that idea before, and Valve obviously does not like that because they don't want to be paying Microsoft money to have Steam. So this is honestly that's what the whole Steam Machine thing was about when Valve just like massively screwed it up. So this time they're like, well, okay, these portable handheld gaming PC things are actually like something that people are actually buying, and we have enough money that we could actually sell one for a decent price. Let's do that and try to get this through this way. And so far it seems to be working, so yay.
Okay. I actually appreciate the little history lesson there, because as you point out, PC side of things, I tune out. I appreciate that, but like how are you enjoying it as a handheld?
Yes.
Like aside from I know you already mentioned like an hour and a half of Elden Ring and stuff, but like anything beyond that, any other thoughts? Like does it rank anywhere for you, or do you not even consider it part of that, or what do you think?
I mean, it's definitely a great handheld. It's like it's like right around like the Switch for me, and I love the Switch also. So, like, I mean, like I said, I've been playing this thing like maybe not every night, but like pretty consistently since I got it in the beginning of July. So, it's definitely great. Like, I haven't really like gotten a chance to like see how it holds up if you like try to dock it. Mostly because the one dock I have, I've ran into issues with my work Mac, and I don't want to like try to actually plug the Steam Deck into it necessarily. I might try it just to see, so I don't have to buy a dock for it, since I have a pretty decent gaming PC, so I have literally no reason to dock it, other than say I'm like, yeah, okay, it works good, or it works terribly dock compared to an actual PC. But
okay,
but yeah, like, I mean,
can I ask you questions about it?
Yes, please do.
You know, like, how's the battery life for you aside from Elden Ring? Is it variable, or is it just kind of relatively consistent?
It's super variable. Like, if you're playing an indie game, you'll definitely get a good like 3 or 4 hours out of it. I haven't actually the main thing I've been actually playing on it has been like Rogue Legacy 2, and that one, I mean, I haven't actually drained the battery while playing that, because usually when I'm actually playing the Steam Deck, it's at night and closer to when I'm going to go to bed. So by the time I'm done, I'm like, okay, yep. So I have about half of the battery life left, and I've been playing for like 2.5 hours. So for games for like the indie games and stuff like that, obviously it works a lot better than for like the AAA ones. But I've also played a little bit of Stray on it, and that one also has like the same battery life range as like something like Elden Ring, but Stray also literally just came out like half a month ago. So it's not necessarily like just like the super AAA games, but like anything that's like intentionally like designed to be like either like PS4 or PS5 games, even if they're not running at that graphical fidelity, because there's no reason to do it on a Steam Deck when you have a 720p screen, or whatever resolution it actually is.
So, you obviously listened to the podcast, and I had brought up some concerns. More so, I would consider them questions, which is good that you're here. My big thing at the time, at least that I said, was I feel like the Steam Deck requires a certain measure of planning that your traditional handhelds do not. Like, for example, and this is not necessarily the same audience, and I understand that before I ask this question, but a kid with a Game Boy and like 5 games is just like, I'm bored, I switch games, I move on, he's playing them on the bus or on the plane or whatever he's doing. but you don't really have to plan much other than bring the device and bring the games, possibly batteries. But if you have the Steam Deck, presumably it has to connect online at some point. It has to download games. It has to download firmware updates, software updates. How much planning is required if you want to drop of the hat, use it? Or is it one of those situations where you could easily see yourself be like, all right, I brought it. I'm ready to use it. I'm at the airport. I'm going to go, oh, no, I forgot to update it. And now it's not going to work, or it's going to work in a limited capacity or something like that.
Honestly, not that much more than you would like with a Switch, if you're using a Switch primarily as a handheld. Because, I mean, granted, I mean, it's a little bit worse than the Switch in that regard, because, like, with the Switch, there are some games that you don't actually need to do an update for, because for whatever reason, they actually came out somewhat decent without bugs and without a day one patch. Like, a decent amount of Nintendo games seem to be that way when I first got them. I mean, but of course, sometimes you need to get a day one patch on those too. You need to update your Switch. And so with the Steam Deck, the only thing that's really going to trip you off from, and this is what I heard since I haven't actually taken mine out of my apartment yet, is that you might need to actually run the game first so it can finish its like installation / updates for like whatever dependencies it needs before you could actually play it in offline mode.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's one of those things where it feels like it would require more work, but I wanted to, that's why I prefaced it the way I did, which is I also feel like the Steam Deck is something more adults are going to use rather than children.
Oh,
to be honest, I don't even know what the hell kids use anymore. I assume they're just playing on their phones, and the Switch, but yeah, that's a different discussion.
The Steam Deck audience is not kids. I mean, maybe you might have a kid, like a teenager who's like getting into PC gaming and stuff like that, and sees the Steam Deck and is like, "Oh, okay, I want that instead of whatever the next Switch is." But honestly, the only people who would do that are people who aren't interested in Nintendo games.
Sure.
So the actual competition between the Switch and the Steam Deck is pretty low.
Okay, any other thoughts on the Steam Deck? Any questions? I mean, well, I guess I don't know. You don't have questions for me about that. Do you have anything else you want to say about it?
Well, not a ton, but I am kind of interested to see like where gaming goes after this and how much like the Steam Deck is actually going to affect it. Because right now it could go either way. Either it will do absolutely nothing other than affect the market of like those mini handheld gaming PCs that are basically handheld consoles, and it's like, yeah, Valve has one, and Valve's one is great, and it's the least expensive one, and it's the one that works mostly best with Steam because Valve made it and did it that way. Or it could be like, or Sony might be like, and Microsoft down the line might be like, well, Nintendo did a handheld form factor dockable thing and that worked, but they're Nintendo. Back then when they did that, it could have just been a fluke on their part. But now Valve did this and they're doing well. Maybe the PlayStation 6 and Xbox whatever the next Xbox Series console is, maybe that will be a handheld. We're really going to have to wait and see on that, and see if Valve ever actually like goes to retail on that instead of just selling directly. But,
something you said there kind of made me think, like, obviously Microsoft famously is like the only major video game company that never attempted a handheld. I mean, Atari did, SNK did, obviously Sega, Nintendo, whatever. But of all the big boys who stuck around, they're the only ones that never did. And I was always of the philosophy, like, yeah, you can kind of see why. Like, they never really took Sony seriously in that realm, and they were right. I think they knew better than to try and take Nintendo on. They didn't really perceive them as any sort of threat because, their original reason for getting into consoles in the first place was Sony was a threat to the living room. But I don't think they cared about that. But I will say this. I would bet you they're more concerned about the possibility of what you just said about Valve changing that, because that changes their PC market potentially. And that could be perceived as a direct threat. So let me put it this way to rephrase. Nothing any video game company ever did motivated Microsoft to make a handheld. Valve might be the first company to change their mind. I'm not saying they will, Just might. It makes more sense than anything else that they've ever dealt with in that arena.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, granted, if Microsoft could actually work out a deal with Valve to get Game Pass on the Steam Deck, they might also just do that. Depending, because they definitely do want to get the Xbox brand away from just being the console at this point.
100% agreed. 100% agreed. But that boils down to what Valve wants. Maybe does Valve see them as direct competition they don't want to deal with? But then again, that also leaves the opportunity open for Microsoft and Nintendo to do that together. Because, I mean, Microsoft, as you point out, they'd love to put Xbox Game Pass on the Switch. Why not? Their philosophy is very different than everybody else's. So we'll see. But I guess what I would say is...
one caveat on what I just said. You can actually install Windows on a Steam Deck if you want. So if you wanted to get Game Pass on the Steam Deck, you technically could. What I'm thinking more is more specifically integrated as part of Steam OS, where if you have a Microsoft Game Pass account, you could just play the Game Pass, install and play the Game Pass games on that.
Right. More, I'm not going to say legitimate, but more streamlined would probably be a better way to put it. Again, it depends on their corporate motivations and who cares about what. And all I'm saying is I think this will put more energy into Microsoft getting into the handheld arena, even if only digitally, to put Game Pass, as you point out, within the infrastructure and the hardware of other people. We'll see, but it also depends largely on how successful the Steam Deck ultimately proves to be.
Right. Yeah. Until for all we know, what Valve's doing now, where they're selling directly to people on Steam, where you put down $5 and you wait in a queue until yours is available, and then you pay for it and it gets shipped to you. For all you know, they might hit the entire market just doing that, and then not actually go to retail and have to even start trying to compete with people who weren't already inclined to get a Steam Deck because it existed. Yeah. Although, considering Steam's user base, that might actually be enough to be considered a success. But it's not going to be enough to necessarily make Sony be like, well, okay, time to go make a PlayStation version of the Switch, or Microsoft to be like, let's go make a portable Xbox.
Yeah, I don't see Microsoft getting into the hardware. I mean, that was kind of a vague possibility, but at most more of a fantasy. I don't see Sony re-entering that after the Vita, at least not anytime soon. Yeah, if the Steam Deck is successful enough to make Sony be like, well, okay, at this point we might as well just make our next console a hybrid like the Switch. Mm-hmm. That's the only way I can see it happening. They're not doing a dedicated handheld again, not after the Vita. Exactly, and I don't know if they would do a combo hybrid, just because the advantage Nintendo had is that they intentionally, you go back a few generations, and they basically just did the GameCube twice, with the Wii being the second version of it. And so the hardware was no longer expected to be up to date. Imagine, you've seen a PS5. They're beasts. Imagine trying to get that into a form factor while the PS5 is relevant. Because the alternative is the PS6, depending on wherever that happens, would be a PS5 in your pocket, which is not... that just gives the generation to Microsoft, essentially, if they actually advance the hardware. So I don't think they could even do it.
No, if Sony were going... Honestly, if Sony were probably going to do that, they do the hybrid thing and by copying Nintendo's approach, they would have done it with the PS5. The fact that they didn't kind of implies that they're not even considering that, despite being a Japanese company, and Japan is much bigger on handhelds than we are over here.
While that's true, let me yeah, I agree with you there. Let me throw another monkey wrench in that thought process, though. Have you ever seen the sales stats on the PS5 in Japan?
I haven't.
They're barely above the Xbox Series X.
That is
we're talking a couple hundred. It's stunning, actually. The Japanese have not that they're flocking to the Xbox Series X. That's not particularly successful either. But it turns out more of them are valuing Game Pass than I think a lot of people thought. So we'll
Yeah.
see, because if they're like, look, the console market is dead in Japan, which is a stunning thing to think about, by the way, maybe then they have no choice but to find some way to portabilize it. Because, yeah, the Switch is still a success over there. And Microsoft always just runs Japan at a loss. But we'll see. I mean, that's a different angle.
Runs everything at a loss for Xbox, or at the very least, like, have they actually made money yet?
I have never found that out, because I know going into the Xbox One, they definitely were still like $5 billion in the red. Yeah, I don't know if they ever came back on that.
That was because of the Red Ring of Death. I mean, if that had
I'm also including the OG Xbox in that.
Oh yeah, like the OG Xbox like never made money either.
No, it lost. It lost.
Would have.
Yeah, the 360 would have. The OG lost 4.4 on its own. It ended 4.4 negative. And then, yeah, the 360 would have, but the Red Rings of Death fiasco basically killed it. So they went into the Xbox One, and we're now talking about something that happened 9 years ago, if you can believe that, where I know, right? Where they started basically at like -5, maybe -5.5. Now, Xbox One famously started off as a complete debacle. Now, when did they right that ship? Did they truly, financially speaking? I honestly don't know. They kind of stopped revealing that. So I don't know. I really don't. And if they have made any of that money back, it's been entirely on the success of Game Pass. Like there's nothing else that's doing that. But I mean, but then at the same time, you think about it, like you hear them say, oh, they went into it a -5.5 billion. Meanwhile, they bought Activision for like 60 or whatever the hell it was. It's like, they don't care.
No,
they don't care.
Yeah, they surprisingly don't care, honestly.
Yeah.
And now that you've reminded me of that, and then, yeah, no, they definitely haven't made money.
Yeah, it's not even possible. Like, it's...
If they made anything, they used it and then whatever else they had available for Activision.
Yeah. And Bethesda. Like, it just keeps happening.
Well, yeah. Like,
wait till next year when yeah. Wait till we find out next year when they buy EA. Anyway, yeah.
I hope if they try that definitely never... That doesn't go through, but who knows what the FCC is going to actually care about monopoly-wise.
Correct.
Or FTC,
but all right.
rather.
Yeah. But all right, anything else to add on this, or should we move on?
No, we should move on at this point.
All right, well, we'll move on from that. That was, like I said, we're doing kind of a chop suey thing, because technically Joseph's subject was not that. But he picked that later, and that was fine because it was just kind of a follow-up. I think it was like a PS. So when he didn't have a subject, Rob, who ironically is not even here, came up with a subject for us. And that was going to be about, it's the summer months right now. We had once talked about, when the holidays roll around, like what kind of games do you ever want to play? Is there anything that's like something that brings back a good memory, a Christmas day, maybe something Christmas themed, like a Christmas Nights into Dreams, whatever it is. We had talked about that like a long time ago, but he was like, why don't you try the summer version of that? So, now personally, I can't think of any games other than like sports ones where it's like the Summer Olympics that are actually specifically about the summer, where that's like part of the whole title and the gimmick. But you can talk about gaming memories you have in the summer or recommendations for things you like to play in the summer. So I'll let you kind of simmer on that for a second. But while you do that, I'll talk about some of mine. So, I have a history of playing in the summer when I have like a little more free time to play stuff like that. One of my go-to, returns is usually survival horror stuff. And usually it's ones I've already played, but maybe I want to play again and try it differently. And sometimes I expand on the series and go a little further with it. So the last game series I played all the way around with that mindset was the Silent Hill games, specifically 1 and 2. I played Silent Hill 1 all the way through. I was like, God, this is such a good game. And it's really kind of a shame it doesn't have like a proper remake or re-release. I mean, the last time it was like legitimately sold was still on the PS1, other than like re-releases of the PS1 version on like the PS Classic, or I think on the PS3 you can do the digital downloads, but like it's not on any sort of physical collection anywhere. It's something you like. They didn't remake it at all. They didn't include it. Like even when they did that terrible HD collection of 2 and 3, they didn't put it on there. Like it just kind of doesn't exist outside of that ecosystem, which is a little strange to me because it's such an amazing game. And then I played Silent Hill 2 all the way through, and I'm just gonna say it. That game did not age as well as I remember it.
Really?
I remember playing that like 10 years ago, and being kind of blown away by it. You know, I thought, wow, what a deep story. This is so cool. I really like this. And this time around, I found myself, I can't believe I'm about to say this, I found myself utterly bored like the whole time. I was like, this character is nowhere near as interesting as Harry Mason. James Sunderland is just not. You know, it comes off like it's trying to be a lot deeper than it really is. Well, it doesn't really answer much of its own setup, and I know that's kind of the point. But I kind of was so disappointed by the end of it that I was like, do I even want to continue? And I started playing Silent Hill 3, and I should have finished, but I just kind of got not interested in continuing with it because it just felt like a waste of my time. That's not really a fair point to make to Silent Hill 3. It was mostly piggybacking off of what I was kind of disappointed with in Silent Hill 2. And I was trying to figure out what it was because, you know, a lot of people point to the tank controls and stuff. I have no problem with that. I'm a Shenmue fan. I got no problem with tank controls. It wasn't the controlling mechanism. It was none of that. It was more like the first game felt legitimately terrifying to me while its story was in of itself captivating. Like it just somehow felt more immersive and more real, where Silent Hill 2, the way I remembered it was way more interesting than how it actually was. Like I think that game starts off with an amazing setup. The hook of like this guy receives a letter from his dead wife, you know, 3 years later. He's like, what the hell is that all about? But then it becomes way too, it sounds stupid to say this because I have played it before, but it becomes too predictable. Like it's not even like, you know, Eddie is clearly also him. Like, and you know, I'm sitting there playing this with my girlfriend and she's calling all of this out, having never played any of this before. She's like, yeah, obviously that's not really his wife. Lisa is not his wife. You know, that's just an amalgamation of what he thinks. And she called that like the second you see her. And as we're going along, it's like, yeah, that fat Eddie guy, like that's clearly James, like in his innards, you know, like how he feels about himself. You know, it was like, oh wow, like this is much more predictable than I remembered it being. Partially through the, you know, the zeitgeist of her talking about it, but yeah, but at the same time, I remember sitting there being like, I don't know why, I just remember this being a more interesting game, and then by the end of it, you're like, so he just gets out of there with the girl and they're fine? All right.
Oh, but yeah, the thing with Silent Hill 2, from what I remember, is that there are multiple endings, and it's not there's a choice you make at the end and it determines which ending you get. It's based off like all the actions you take in the game.
Yeah, I think there's 4 or 5 endings. The same is true of the first Silent Hill, actually.
Right, but that one's easier to actually get the ending you want.
Correct. But yeah, I mean, and I'm not saying it's not a good game, and I'm not saying it's deep or none of that stuff. I'm just saying I remember it being better than it was. And that said, I still play the OG Xbox version. I didn't play the terrible HD remake versions or re-release versions. Not. But yeah, I know better than that. But I don't know. I found myself trying to convince myself to like it, and that's not usually a good sign.
No, it's not. The only thing I could kind of see like why you would necessarily think it wouldn't age well when you thought it was amazing. I mean, when it came out, you were like, what, like 15, 16?
Yeah, but here's the irony. I didn't play through it all the way through until like 2013. So only like 9 years ago, like the same year that we were just talking about with the Xbox One and the PS4 came out. That same time is the first time I fully played Silent Hill 2 all the way through. Like I had played it in chunks here and there, but like fully through, and I loved it the first time. This time through, I'm like, I found myself kind of bored, and I was a little surprised by that.
Well, 2013 is like right when Gen 8 started. Yep. So there's been like a lot of I mean, there's definitely been like a lot of great games with pretty good or great stories in the last gen and power generation. So maybe it's just that, and you technically also don't have nostalgia for it because you first played it like as an adult, like
yes, that is
well
correct.
into your adult life. So that might explain it there. Like there's just been better game stories that you've experienced since then. So now it doesn't.
It's hard to say, but I mean, I'll give you the flip side story because it's possible I'll listen to this later and be like, wow, dude, that was one of my favorite games ever. Why was there like one summer there where I didn't like it? It's entirely possible. So the flip side of that, and I've told this story in videos before, so I won't tell the whole thing, but long story short, in 2003, my mom, my sister, and my friend and my sister's friend, we took a trip out to New Jersey, the coast, to go to like a beach house and stuff. And while we were out there, my buddy Matt was like, "Hey, why don't we like take some video games with us and we can play these like when we're not outside, we can play stuff." And we brought the Dreamcast, the one with the because it had a portable screen and everything, and so we could play in the car on the drive there and all that. And then you could still connect it to the TV when you got there. And so he picked out the games we were going to play, and he picked out, we got some of the Resident Evils, we got like Metal Gear Solid, and we got the Bleemcast version specifically, Spider-Man, but he also picked up Shenmue. And at the time, I hated that game, believe it or not. Like the first time I ever played Shenmue was right when it came out. Like a friend of mine rented it, and I thought this was like the stupidest game I'd ever played. I was like, why are we hanging out in an arcade? I don't like this. This is dumb. I didn't understand this at all. And it took until 2003, like a good 4 years later, when my friend basically forced me to play it. And not because he had any great passion for it. He was more like, we're here, we need to play something, we beat these, we're playing this. And we sat there and we played it. And at first I was kind of like, ugh. And then I realized, like, okay, this is kind of cool. I'm kind of into this. And then I realized, like, now. It's my favorite game of all time. So it is, I'm not sure I necessarily have a message here, but what I'm kind of, I guess, saying is that your tastes can change. And they can happen both positively and negatively. And both of these situations, to stick with the theme of this subject, is they both happened in the summer. I remember them as good gaming and bad gaming memories, as it turns out. But yeah, I don't know. It doesn't really hit on what Rob originally wanted us to talk about. There's not some game I revisit every summer that makes me think of summer. But if there's anything that does, is even though it's kind of a broken record for me, it would be Shenmue 1, just because of that actually happened over a summer that I really remember kind of changing a lot of things in my life because of that. But yeah.
Yeah, and I still don't really have any like memories that I can really think of that would fit that. There's no game that I make a point to go back to every summer. Like there just isn't. It's either I'm playing stuff that came out, stuff that I missed, and like, okay, well, I'm filling out the backlog now because I have time to play it, or I'm falling into the Civ 6 and or Stellaris hole, and then I'll look up and then like 80 and then like, the last 2 weeks I played this game for 80 hours. So, but that's not a summer thing. That's just like a year-round thing for me.
So I guess with that in mind, the next thing I kind of want to talk about here is we also have another backer who we've talked about before. His name is Chuck Shaw. He picks a subject. He gets to do that every month, though. He was kind of just, I guess, appropriately enough, he just kind of wanted to contribute to this little chop suey we're doing here because he didn't really have much that he wanted me to talk about, but I'm happy to do it. So he runs a convention called Mo GameCon, which I was just a guest at. I've actually been a guest at it every single time it has ever happened, including the 1 year where it got literally cornholed. I don't know if you've ever heard that story. I was supposed to go to this convention. It's in St. Louis, and it was earlier this year. It would have been in February. They booked my flight, everything's set up. The con's 10 days away. Everything's good to go. And the convention center they were going to have it in just randomly canceled on them for a cornhole tournament.
Cornhole, I remember hearing about that.
Cornhole is a sport. I didn't even know that. Okay, when I hear cornhole, I think of exactly what Urban Dictionary defines it as. I'm like, wow, that's a thing. I mean, of all the things to screw over a con, it literally had to be something called cornhole. So yeah, but and they still brought me down, even though because they had already paid for it. They're like, yeah, you want to just come down and hang out? I was like, hell yeah, I want to come down and hang out because these guys are awesome. Chuck is an awesome guy. So, but it's kind of fitting actually because we're talking about summer memories. I've now been to every Mo Game Con and every summer since 2015. So it's like become a staple of my summer at this point, with the exception of 2020 because the pandemic was on and they didn't have one. But other than that, it's always been a thing. And so now it's like a big part of my gaming summer, even though ironically I'm not usually playing games at it. I'm like trying to find cool games. But yeah, I mean, it was a great convention. Had a good time as always. There was a few other, guests that were there. Paul Niemeyer, the guy who created the Mortal Kombat logo, buddy of mine, he was there. And we, a bunch of people I see regularly. Gaming Off the Grid guys were there. Do you know them?
No.
Yeah, they were actually on this podcast one time. One episode. They were on for one episode. They were there. A bunch of it's like it's gotten to the point, man, where like I know so many people are there that's like you're just kind of like friends with everybody. It's kind of cool actually, but it's also been interesting to have the perspective of seeing that convention completely age and change and grow up. Like when they first started it, like the guys running it were younger and they were all like, oh, this is what we're going to do. We're all gung ho about making this happen. We're all about collecting games. And now I'm at a point, like I'm watching them and like most of them are like, yeah, I got kids. I got to sell all this stuff now. And it's like, it's like the attitude changes, but it's been kind of interesting to watch it happen in real time. But Mo Game Con is one of my favorite retro game conventions. It might debatably actually be my favorite. To also be, full disclosure, it's not the best one ever. The best one's going to be like Portland Retro Game Expo, Midwest Gaming Classic, Too Many Games. Those are the three definitive ones. But Mo Game Con is probably my favorite in the same way The Room is one of my favorite movies, even though it's objectively not a good film. Mo Game Con it's a good con, don't get me wrong. I didn't mean to compare it to The Room, sorry. But I'm just saying it is a fun show, and I always recommend it to people. All right, well, Joseph, as always, thank you very much for joining me here.
Thank
Chuck,
you for having me.
Of course. Chuck, thanks you for that subject. And yeah, we'll move on now. And we're back. Still no Rob, but who cares? We've got Keith now. What's up, Keith?
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Doing pretty good, actually.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. So yeah, today what we're going to talk about, because you've just become we're just talking about movies and stuff now, movies and TV shows and whatever. It's just kind of fun. What we decided to do is talk about something that is sadly I don't think getting enough coverage.
Yep.
Which is the Beavis and Butthead revival. So I think we'll cover this in a couple of ways. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about our memories of Beavis and Butthead before we talk about this. Maybe a little history, whatever.
Yeah.
And then honestly, okay, so at the time we're recording this, there's only like 2 episodes of the new show out, but the movie came out, the Beavis and Butthead Do the Universe. So we'll probably talk mostly about that, would be my guess.
Yeah, I was going to keep it mostly just on the movie.
Yeah, spoilers, that movie's incredible.
Yep.
But we'll get back to that. So let me start with you. Do you remember, like, how old are you? Do you remember Beavis and Butthead as a kid?
I'm 36 years old, so I am in the perfect age for it was inappropriate for me at my age, but I definitely watched the heck out of it. I watched MTV. I watched a lot of the episodes on MTV right when it came out, right when it premiered. My dad, with our Sega Genesis, when he gave it to us, gave us Beavis and Butthead with it, right out of the gate. And so that was like one of my first games I ever played on Sega Genesis as well, was Beavis and Butthead. My brother actually looks a little bit like Butthead and had braces at the time. He actually had braces. And he can actually do that laugh really well, too. It's kind of funny. He's got that, that kind of, that upper lip he's got, it shows his brace. My brother looks exactly like that. Like, if he had longer hair, he'd look perfect. And all the kids in the neighborhood were really into it as well. It's rough, but it's also fun. Nowadays it's not so bad, because he's got his head shaved, he's in the army. It's a little different nowadays. But, can you imagine that, Butthead in the army? But I've had a lot of experience. I saw Beavis and Butthead Do America in the theaters, and I had a lot of VHSs of the episodes as well, and also followed Daria. I watched her leave Beavis and Butthead, and so I kind of follow Mike Judge since then. I even loved his movies as well, and I'm a big fan of King of the Hill, which is another thing that he does as well. So that's kind of my history of it. You know, I've been a big fan of it for many years.
Okay. It's funny. So I'm only a year younger than you, and I don't know if that made a big difference or what, but I remember Beavis and Butthead in the 90s, mostly because my mother was so opposed to me watching it. Now, I've told stories about my mother, my late mother, on my channel for years because she was cool. She was like, here, you can have this. Here, I don't care about that. Go for it, whatever. Beavis and Butthead, if I had to pinpoint something, even just one thing that she was like, you absolutely could not have that or participate in that, it was Beavis and Butthead. And I remember years later asking her, like, what was the militant distaste of Beavis and Butthead? And her philosophy on it was, because like any parent who hates something like that, she didn't bother to actually watch it. She just assumed it was meant to make you stupid. Whereas the irony was, the lesson of the show was, these two are idiots, don't behave like them. It was a warning to the future that if you don't take better care of your kids, they're going to turn out like Beavis and Butthead. And that whole message, I think, was unfortunately missed on her. So basically, it was the only show type of thing like I ever had to like sneak away to find and watch. And it was like I would go to a friend's house and maybe they'd have an episode or two and we just watch it repeatedly because it was so awesome. On MTV or whatever, which I hated MTV. I still do. Like, I'm not a music guy. They don't play music anymore or whatever, but like I never enjoyed that, but I would try to sneak away to watch Beavis and Butthead from time to time. But you could only catch it in little clips here and there because it was, it's not like today where it was, you were utterly dependent upon TV Guide back then to know when something was going to air. So, I could never really find it like in any sort of pattern. So, whenever I could sneak an episode, I would. But for the most part, I never really got that much of an opportunity to see it as a kid. Just be aware of its references and all that kind of stuff. What actually was the big change was the movie, the Beavis and Butthead Do America. By that point, by the time that movie came out, I was probably, was it 98? So I would have been 9, 10. And it came out, I remember it came out at Blockbuster on VHS, and I convinced my older cousin to buy me the tape. And that, oh, totally, my mom will not care. She will not care. My mom cared. She was pissed. She was pissed. But at the same time, she was like, whatever, I don't care anymore. So she never made me, like, get rid of the tape or anything. But I watched that movie, like, 1,000 times. So it's funny, like, I had seen almost none of the show. I had really just seen the movie repeatedly. Except for a couple of episodes here and there, like I said. The irony is, the show, I actually think, was largely ruined by its platform because it was on, MTV, and so they wanted to air music videos, which was a great way for Mike Judge to save on animation costs and all that, so he would just do riffing on music videos. That was actually like the only thing I ever really hated about the show because I was like, I'm into the story of what's going on, and then it cuts away to some stupid, irrelevant music video bullshit, and I loathed that. It was like the exact polar opposite emotion. From like, I'm loving this is the funniest thing ever to wow, this sucks all of a sudden, and then it would go back and forth. It's like it would go from this is cool to no, this sucks. Like it would constantly switch that way, just because of those music videos. But you flash forward over time, and the show it ends. Mike Judge decides he wants to do King of the Hill, which, to be totally honest with you, until literally like maybe a couple years ago, I didn't forgive Mike Judge for abandoning Beavis and Butthead to make that show.
Oh wow.
I decided to watch King of the Hill all the way through and be like, okay, this is not bad. It's not as good as Beavis and Butthead, but it's not bad. Although it's better structured.
It's a good compliment to the world, I say, but definitely not a good replacement.
Yeah, it's an adjacent thing. Actually, it's funny you mentioned Daria. Daria is definitely Beavis and Butthead adjacent because Mike Judge had nothing to do with that show. He actually didn't want it to exist. And, you know, it was funny. He was mentioning in interviews, like, you know, they did that 2011 revival of Beavis and Butthead. She's not in it. And she is not in any of the new material either, at least according to him. Except that's technically not true because she does have a visual cameo
in the movie, yeah.
But she doesn't say anything. Anyway, that's irrelevant. But all I was trying to say is that, yeah, Daria was adjacent. It was not considered, in Mike Judge's head, it's not canon.
It's actually a good way to test people out if they are actually more Beavis and Butthead fans or Daria fans, is actually just to mention Daria and see where they go. Because my friends usually straight away go, diarrhea, cha-cha-cha, diarrhea, cha-cha-cha. and some other people are like, oh, I love that show. Like, my girlfriend's like, oh, I love that show, you know, something like that.
It's, to be fair to them, it's an easy mistake to make because the Daria show was actually quite good.
Yeah.
And she obviously had way more screen time on that show than she ever did on Beavis and Butthead. And to be fair, even in Beavis and Butthead, most of the episodes she's in are like the early ones, which are the more unwatchable ones. So it's kind of, you kind of get it. I mean, there's a few great examples of her being there in some of the good episodes, but a lot of the stuff was that early stuff. So if you want to talk the overall history of Beavis and Butthead, those first like 2 seasons, maybe even 3, are really hard to watch because of how bad the animation is. To the point where if you look for that show now, Mike Judge mostly has not allowed most of the episodes to be re-released. Like 1/3 of them have been re-released officially.
Yep.
Although I think Paramount Plus might have opened that door a little bit. I'm not totally sure, just because they're putting all this effort into Beavis and Butthead. But anyway, yeah. So I guess the way we could both describe it is we have some history with Beavis and Butthead. Yeah. We understand the history of Beavis and Butthead. And I think we were both pretty excited about the revival. Do you remember the 2011 revival?
Actually, honestly, now you mention it, I don't remember it at all.
I do.
No.
So, Beavis and Butthead had been off the air at that point for like 15 years already, which is insane to think about because 2011 was 11 years ago. but time flies, man. As you get older, it gets worse. But anyway, so... yeah, they were off the air for all that time, and then there was rumors about now that he was done with King of the Hill, that he was, you know, and he didn't have any movies in active production, I don't think, that he wanted to do Beavis and Butthead again. And so they did the one season, the 2011 season 8 of Beavis and Butthead, which was an interesting season, and I think is gonna, when people do like retrospectives on the whole show, they're gonna point out that one as bizarre, because you have the original run, which takes place in the environment in which it was created. It takes place in the 90s. It was made in the 90s, right? The new one, as you know, based on, again, we're openly talking spoilers about the new movie.
Of course.
Putting that out there. But the new movie, as well as everything after it, takes place in our time, despite the fact that Beavis and Butthead are essentially 90s characters. The 2011 one was weird because it basically just brought them into 2011 but didn't explain that. So there's modern references to things like Twilight, and they're watching, you know, what MTV kind of devolved into, which was like, instead of doing music videos, they're watching, you know, Teen Mom, you know, type of reality TV crap, which was actually admittedly much better than the music video stuff. But it was an interesting season, but I saw this one reviewer who wrote up his bit, and he said it the best. He was like, the problem with this season is that Beavis and Butthead existed as a warning that people are getting dumber and that we need to fix this. We need to work on this. By the time the 2011 season rolled around, and they're, you know, rather than cutting to music videos, they're cutting to Teen Mom, and they're cutting to Jersey Shore and all that stuff they're reacting to. They're like, Beavis and Butthead are now smarter than the characters they're making fun of. Think about that. Because, you know, the characters on Jersey Shore are infinitely stupider than Beavis and Butthead. So they were like, that model didn't quite work, which is why it was only really around for a season. I'm stunned, to be honest, that they announced 9 years later in 2020 that he wanted to do a new season. And I don't know this to be, like, the motivation. But part of me wonders if part of the reason we got the revival was because of COVID. Because the only entertainment industry that thrived at the height of the pandemic was animation, because everybody could do it remotely. And whereas like film productions were all shut down. So part of me wonders if that's why we got a revival.
Oh,
anyway,
makes
that
sense.
brings us, yeah, that I don't know that. I'm just speculating on that last point. But that brings us to now. So I've done enough jabbering. What have you thought about all the new material?
All right. So now we are here in 2022, and Paramount Plus gave us this Beavis and Butthead Do the Universe. Luckily, I've got Paramount Plus because of being a Star Trek fan. I gotta have Paramount Plus. So I thought this was just an amazing revival of what Beavis and Butthead always like, almost an exact, almost duplicate of Beavis and Butthead Do America, just for the 2022 audience. That's kind of what I felt like. I honestly felt like it actually got a lot of the same beats as the original Beavis and Butthead Do America. So if you've seen that movie, it'll be very similar with just the beats and the way the movie kind of flows and whatnot. They act 1, 2, and 3. But I enjoyed the heck out of the style of comedy that they're bringing forward. Rather than just reference comedy. We got a little more slapstick. We got a little bit of reference in there, of course. But we got a great amount of slapstick and what I call like a Mr. Magooing. As in, like, things are just happening around them because of their ignorance. They don't really know what's going on, but they're just kind of coasting through because things are happening around them, kind of like Mr. Magoo used to do back in the day. And I really enjoyed the heck out of that. It made me laugh so hard. It was really, really funny. It's a great release to me because it just gives me the essence of Beavis and Butthead. All the old jokes are in there. You got the nachos. You got cornholio. You've got a lot of amazing callbacks. Of course, Daria shows up for that 1 second, like we did say. And the way that they actually are able to bring them into 2022, that was great. Perfect. I'm cool with it. They're in 1998. They're in 2022. And we'll get into how they kind of got that way in a little bit. But I really enjoyed it a lot. You know?
Yeah, I gotta reflect that. Like that, I'm gonna be totally honest. That is my favorite movie this whole year.
I didn't stop laughing. I was laughing so freaking hard.
I have not laughed that hard at a movie in, I don't know how long. Like, I was dying. And here's the thing. You know where I first saw it?
Yeah.
I was flying from New York to Dublin, Ireland, and so I had, like, time to kill on the plane, and I thought, okay, I had downloaded it, and I was like, okay, because I got Paramount Plus now.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, okay, I'll watch this. And, yeah, I was excited to see it, but I just kind of thought, it'll be 90 minutes of what I expect to be just, fire. Like, you just kind of... I didn't know how much more was in the tank. You know what I mean? Like, how much more could there really be to say? Like, yeah, we'll get a cornholio bit. Beavis will get smacked a few times. Like, that's kind of all I was expecting.
Oh, God.
What I was not expecting to laugh my ass off. What?
But what you got was actual entertainment. Actual joy.
Agree.
You know?
All right. Not only was it amazingly funny, it actually was narratively compelling, and unlike, and listen up, Ryan Johnson, who definitely doesn't listen to this, it subverted your expectations in a good way, because you didn't expect a lot of the directions it would go, but they work better, than you would have expected. Like, do you realize this is the only time in the entire history of Beavis and Butthead that Beavis gets character development? Ever? Like, he has an emotional motivation to do things. He explains it like it's a therapy session. He's like, Butthead sucks. He's always kicking my ass for no reason, and I want to move on. Like, they have a fight, like an emotional fight, where the two of them just stop being friends for a while. Like, that has never happened with all the things that they've gone through. It was like, wow, they actually went somewhere with it. While they took what Beavis and Butthead is best at, taking social modern norms and kind of putting it through the lens of a complete idiot duo. They take like modern things, like white privilege. Like that white privilege bit is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life.
Please discuss the white privilege scene. It's lovely.
But, I mean, I can't do it justice, and you know that. You can't either. Like, the movie just has to present itself. But I mean, I have to say it, guys. Like, if you like even the base idea of Beavis and Butthead, if you've ever seen one episode, whatever, this is still for you. You don't really have to have seen anything prior, though it doesn't hurt. But most of the, as he said, there's no nostalgia berries. There's no, like, massive references to the previous seasons. Like, hey, remember the time Daria was there? Remember that? You don't have any of that crap. It's like, oh, why don't we actually just write a new adventure for our characters that doesn't entirely base itself on remember that? I mean, to the movie's credit, the most predictable joke in Beavis and Butthead, if you ask me, not the, we're going to kick him in the balls or something like that, but like the cornholio thing is always the most predictable thing. You know it's coming at some point. And still they found a way to make it funny.
Yep.
Like, where he gets the pills from the prison inmate, and and he yells at this gigantic prison inmate to shut up. Like, it's just, and then even Butthead sees this happening, doesn't attempt to stop it, but fully understands what's about to happen, and all he says is, "This is gonna be cool," because he knows some stupid shit is about to go down, and he doesn't care. It's like, I can't even explain it. It was such a good movie. I highly recommend. What's disappointing to me, and I guess not surprising, this should have been in theaters. Like, this was way better than anything I've seen in theaters in a long time.
Yeah, I was really expecting that, like you said earlier, definitely, one or two, Beavis and Butthead tropes going on, gonna be kind of setting up their new world for their new show, etc., etc. But I did not expect a blockbuster caliber animation event, if you know what I mean, as you said.
Oh yeah, I mean, I will say the animation itself is different. No. I mean, you have to understand, like, the original. I mean, to be fair, Beavis and Butthead's animation.
You don't want the original. You don't want the original.
But yeah, the original movie I think was better animated. It was actually hand drawn on film. You were not going to get that now.
Exactly.
This one was more like modern, low budget. I'm not going to say flash animation because that's kind of a disservice, but that this was done in like the same thing they make South Park in, like just some sort of generic animation engine. It's not handcrafted really. You can tell the difference watching it next to, say, the original Beavis and Butthead film. But if you can kind of just get over that, which is, by the way, a really small thing to get over because it's not like it looks bad. It just looks modern. If you can get over that, you're gonna see one of the funniest film experiences you've ever been through.
Oh, also, did you think, seeing this when I first saw this, Beavis and Butthead do the universe, and I read a small synopsis. I was like, oh god, multiverse bandwagon, here we go. And we did not get that. I kept waiting for that to happen. It never did. And I was like, it didn't. It's not happening. Holy crap, this is still good. It's still going. Another thing that a great shock and a lovely surprise.
I agree. The thing is, if you really break it down, that movie kind of goes at all of the tropes and breaks them all. Like the concept of bringing back like nostalgia berry characters just to have another pointless adventure. It goes at it, crushes it. Goes at the multiverse thing, which is the super hot popular storytelling device right now. Goes at it, crushes it. It even goes at like man, what was I about to say? I just lost the train of thought. But it goes at so many film stereotypes. Like, okay, I know what I was gonna say. They go into space. Okay, that Kevin Smith once very eloquently said that when you send the character in space, that's the end of the franchise. They're out of ideas. Muppets in space, Jason X in space, or whatever it is. Like they always, just I don't know, we're out of ideas. They send them to space. That's like usually the stereotypical bad idea that actually kind of came out of the 80s and 90s. So for them to be like, oh, Beavis and Butthead in space is like a ridiculously stupid idea, but it actually totally works given the way it's written and the way it's performed and constructed. It's just sublime. Like everything about it should not work, and it totally does. Because again, you expect going into this to be like, okay, we're gonna see the characters from the 90s, and we're gonna have some terrible story where they just, magically they're in the future, ha ha ha, look, a phone, ha ha ha. You just kind of have to sit through it. No, crushes it on every conceivable level. Even the stuff you can predict, like it's obvious if they bring them to the future, they're going to be confused by what a modern phone is. Still, they crush it by not just having it be a thing that they're like, oh, this is weird. They make it a fucking character in the movie because they're so dumb they don't understand that the Siri AI bot is not a person.
Yeah, I think she's talking to Serena.
Yeah, exactly, which is another little bit of cleverness. Like, that is, I seriously think, one of the most clever movies that has been made in a long time. Certainly the funniest one I've seen in forever.
The way they get them to space, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, not only did it work organically, but it worked for the times, because at that time, in the late 90s, they were doing all these, like, fringe, like, youth things, like, disturbed youth things in the late 90s. It was a huge thing. It worked really well for that. I love that as well.
I mean, and on top of that, to further that point, you have to remember in the late 90s, nobody gave a crap about what NASA was doing anymore.
Yeah, exactly. They called that one too, yeah. Put that one out there.
Yeah, I mean, they were all over this, and the movie kind of even says it best towards the end, because every character around Beavis and Butthead, and this is true of the first film, by the way, overanalyzes their actions, thinking they must be geniuses, when in reality they're just lucky dumbasses who waltz into a situation not realizing it. So, like, from their perspective, they literally were just playing with that piece of equipment, thinking it resembled a penis going into a vagina. But everybody thought, wow, they must really be into space exploration.
They're performing that perfectly.
Yeah, exactly. Like in the original movie when they shut off the water at the Hoover Dam, and it's just because Beavis is just scratching his butt on the power switch.
We must be dealing with criminal masterminds over here.
Yeah, everybody thinks they're terrorists who figured out a way to escape. It's like, no, that's not. That's what makes it great, because unlike, say, the 2011 season where they kind of got too smart for the audience around them, meaning the other characters, this is not the case anymore. Now they're back to being the dumbasses, just because they're completely surrounded by new situations, the new technologies of the phone and all the things that they don't understand about modern world. And that's the movie, though. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about the show itself, but yeah, I can't recommend this movie enough. I really hope it gets a physical Blu-ray release. It's just ignorance, kind of ignorance as the comedy form. Kind of like I said earlier, I really miss that old cartoon style Mr. Magoo, situations happening around them just because the characters are ignorant. It's a beautiful comedy thing that's been lost over the ages, and I love to see it back. So, yeah, I agree. Even if it was very brief and not the way I would have loved to have seen this in theaters. The thing is, there was no way they were going to release this in theaters, and sadly, that was probably the correct choice, because as much as we're praising this movie, I have not seen a whole lot of people. Nobody would have gone to see it, actually, except for it would have bombed. Maybe. Yeah, it would have bombed. I mean, again, it's essentially free if you already have Paramount Plus. And I'm still not seeing a lot of people talk about it. Like, this is one of the few movies where I loved it so much I actively wanted to go and see what tons of people thought. Like, I went to YouTube to go see the reviews, and there was only a handful of people who had done them. And, it was some of the usual suspects, like Chris Stuckman did one, Angry Joe actually did one, but each of theirs was like 4 minutes. They didn't really have much to say about it. They just kind of all said a very truncated version of what we're saying. Yeah. This is one of the greatest films I've ever seen. Hysterical. Go see it. Bye. Like, that was all they really had to say, because nobody has any great complaints about it. Maybe the fact the animation is more modern, a little cheap looking in that regard, but that's understandable. But aside from that, like, it's phenomenally funny film. And it is a shame that maybe it'll generate more interest, and maybe the new season will generate that, and maybe Beavis and Butthead will truly be revived. I doubt they'll ever truly hit their 90s pinnacle again, but still, this is an unexpected gift, is how great this film was. Absolutely, man. I gotta say, go out there any way you can and just try to see it if you're even remotely laugh at Beavis and Butthead at all. Or honestly, if you just like like a good comedy, a good lighthearted comedy, watch this. It's pretty funny. Yeah. It's amazing. I've seen it 6 times. 6 times. I watched it while I was on vacation at Disneyland rather than being at Disneyland at one point. Yeah. Yeah. Like I watched it. My brother did too in his hotel room, and we were both at Disneyland. Dude, I was in Europe. I watched it 4 times over there. Oh God. I would just, because I'm like, this is just so incredible that I just wanted to like absorb it. And then when I got back here, I wanted to watch it on my my big TV, and that was like a 5th time I saw it. It's just such a great movie. And I think the 6th time I watched it, I was delayed in an airport again. And I was like, oh good, time to watch the Beavis and Butthead movie again. Like, it was just so awesome. I just enjoyed it so much. And we must all praise the great and awesome, smart Beavis for finally doing the one thing in the universe that all Beavis and Buttheads have always wanted to do. I scored.
He scored, man. Yeah.
Yeah. But like I said, this is the only time Beavis ever got, like, character development. Like, he even has that emotional breakdown at the end.
He has a full arc, start to finish.
Yeah,
actually, their relationship
great.
does too. The relationship between the two gets a shot. Butthead kind of like stays his one note, but since he gets that relationship story with Beavis, when they're breaking apart and stuff like that, you get some great moments with him as well.
I agree.
I was hoping he would tell somebody that he had a beer though at one point. I really like that part where he tells people he has beer. It's like, I have a beer.
There was some actually side character development. Not much, but like for example, they mention Shirley Beavis. They give us a name to Beavis's mom.
Right. They did
By the
talk
way,
about her, yeah.
that confirms that Beavis is his last name.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a somewhat, I don't know if it's a joke or if it's just another name reveal that was very subtle. Watch the movie again when they announce, like, they're all walking to the spaceship and everything, which, by the way, when Beavis gives that heartfelt speech and everybody thinks he's talking about going to space, but he's talking about scoring, it's like hilarious. But listen to that scene again and wait, they'll mention Butthead's name. They pronounce it differently, and I'm wondering if that's actually his last name. They refer to him as Butthead.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking that's how it works.
But, like, if you were to remove the first T in his last name, it would be a totally different word that's probably Butthead or Boothhead. So, and that's probably his last name is Butthead.
Yeah.
And he can't spell his own last name because he's Butthead.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? I think
Exactly.
it would not surprise me if that was a reveal that was just kind of subtle.
Yeah.
But then again, that's fan theory.
Yeah, but that Beavis speech, though, I mean, you're gonna feel practically patriotic, guys. I'm telling you, it's that awesome. Just think about the American flag when it's happening, and how hard they work to finally get there and finally be the ones.
Do you know how few people? Like, there's that part.
Yeah,
Like,
few people.
I nearly died when so that same scene. She's walking out and they're talking about they're about to go up to space. And for context, for people who haven't seen it, Beavis and Butthead think they're about to score with this astronaut woman.
Yeah.
And the astronaut woman is talking about going into space and how many people have been into space.
Okay.
So she starts talking about, do you know how few people have ever done this? And she's like 287 men and like 114 women.
Oh, really?
A chimpanzee and a dog.
Wow.
She's talking about people who've been in space. They think that she's talking about how many people have hooked up with her.
Sexual partners, yeah.
And it's so like just amazing.
Butthead, man, this girl hooks up with dogs. She's crazy. Yeah, she's a slut.
She's a slut. 247 guys, 118 women, a dog.
This is the greatest moment of our lives.
It's so funny. Yeah, all right, but I mean, I apologize. I know we said spoilers, but I just don't want to ruin anything from this movie. Just please go see this. It is so
I'm not gonna go
great.
more detailed into like the plot or like anything. Or anything like that. I'm just saying, go see stuff like that. But did you want to actually like switch from movie, go like talk about a few episodes?
Yes, let's switch into that. Now, to be completely honest, I'm gonna have a lot less to say about this for the aforementioned reason, which is only 2 episodes have been released, and I actually didn't have a chance to watch the second one. The only reason I was able to watch the first one was just I had a little time on my hands. But that's I'm just gonna give you the consensus of what I thought of that first episode. Didn't really like it.
I didn't. The escape room thing was kind of like not for me.
I actually thought of the 2 bits.
Did you like that one?
Between the 2 bits, there's the escape room one, and then there's Beavis like with the fire.
Yeah,
I like the escape room one more. Not that it was good.
Okay.
The premise is they're trying an escape room for the first time, but they're just in a bathroom. They don't realize it's not an escape. I thought that was better. The fire one. The premise is that, Beavis is the chosen one who is like fire is his special guy and whatever. And so he goes behind this restaurant and there's like this dumpster on fire and it keeps giving him instructions. And he thinks it's going to tell him like what to burn down. And it just keeps giving him like real good life advice. Like, go get some exercise, clean up, study for a test, and it eventually gets pissed and he has the fire put out. Like, it's not bad, but I will say one thing that really ruined the mechanism for this was, ironically, Paramount Plus itself, because the show has gone back to incorporating other content that is not the story. That was one of the best things about the movie. It never cuts away to a music video. It never cuts away to something totally unrelated to what's going on. It's just the story. Whereas you watch that first episode, it's like, it's about a half hour to watch it, but it's only about 10 minutes of content.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is you have like 5 minutes of the escape room, you have 5 minutes of the fire thing, and then maybe a collective additional 10 minutes of they're watching stuff on TikTok, they're watching stuff on YouTube, whatever, which I'm actually kind of okay with. I just wish they wouldn't interrupt the story with that. That was always my problem with the music videos.
I always felt that should have been the credit sequence, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but the other one that I don't know if it's getting any, maybe it's just I don't know, Paramount Plus is just starting to piss me off. The amount of ads that I would get on that episode was insane. Like, first of all, it's a paid service. I don't really want ads on it to begin with, but okay, we got ads. And then the ads are really long. Like, I started, I had an unskippable 2-minute ad. And then only like a couple of minutes into the episode, I get another one. A few minutes later, I get another one. It was excessive. It took about 30 minutes to get through a 10-minute story. It was kind of insane. So I was like, that really ruined my experience. I stopped paying attention. I was like, I'll just look at my phone.
Yeah, I've noticed that with streaming services, when you have like smaller format shows than the 20-minute format or whatnot, that they like the ads seem to come in way too much off balanced, and just don't work, or just kind of ruin the flow, I guess.
What's annoying about this is Paramount Plus is exclusively a premium service. You pay to have access to it, and they still throw you more ads than YouTube ever does. What the hell is that? And apparently I'm not alone in this, because I did some looking into it, because I thought, I don't remember Paramount Plus doing this.
No, they didn't have that before.
No, this was a relatively recent decision. They did this at like the end of July. At the time we're recording this, it's like the beginning of August. So this is a relatively new decision. Apparently they've lost a ton of subscribers because of this. And I'm like, yeah, why would you pay for this now? Because it's just network television, but worse.
Yeah, I'll tell you, man.
Value.
Star Trek just winded down, man. So Paramount Plus, you're not going to have very much going for you pretty soon, man.
Oh, here's one. Let me throw this out there.
Yeah.
Let me throw this out there. Paramount was cool enough to release the first episode of this season on YouTube for free for everyone to watch.
Oh, right.
You can watch it on there with less ads than on Paramount's own platform.
Wow.
This is a unique situation because most of these corporate revival things, like these old IPs, usually come from corporate mandate where they're like, oh, we're sitting on this old IP that was once really popular. Now the studio's like, we have to make another one just because it's valuable. Like, I don't know why this came to mind, but that terrible Men in Black International movie that Sony forced out the door. The one with Chris Hemsworth and the other girl, the girl from Valkyrie. Yeah. Did you ever see that one?
Oh my god, it was awful. Dude,
it was terrible.
Dude, it made Men in Black 3 look so good.
It made Men in Black 2 look legendary.
Oh, there you go.
Like that. Anyway, so my point is that movie did not come from the original creators being like, oh, we have another story to tell. It came from Sony dumpster diving in their own IP bin being like, what do we have? This is the opposite. This is the rare situation where it wasn't the corporate overlord, in this case MTV and ultimately Paramount, being like, what can we bring back from the 90s or the 80s that people remember? This came from a place of Mike Judge being like, I have an idea. I think I know where a place to go with these characters. And he made that with that creative spark. And you can tell, because this movie in no way has like corporate demand overlord all over it. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It just feels like he made this and was excited to make it.
Yeah, absolutely. You feel the love, the love letter to not only the fans but the characters and what he started out with in the beginning.
I'm really hoping that it gets a physical like Blu-ray release.
I will buy it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really want to see that. I want that to be possessed by me, because that's actually one of the things that scares the hell out of me with all the digital streaming stuff. Like, maybe you saw like HBO Max is changing up a bunch of stuff, and now they're like, oh, a bunch of our movies that were exclusive to our platform are being pulled, and there's no legal way to watch a movie that came out only like 2 or 3 years ago now.
Oh yeah, I heard
like,
about it.
Why is that considered okay? Anything else? Otherwise, I
No,
guess
man, we are all good to go, folks. I hope you had a great time talking about Beavis and Butthead.
Yep. So, Keith, thank you very much, as always, for joining me here. I want to give shout-outs, of course, to Joseph for joining us earlier, as well as Abdullah. Additional shout-outs to Spencer Puryear and Chuck Shaw, as well as Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, Tim Inman, and Trey Wagner. And, sorry you guys didn't get to have any Rob this time, but, it happens.
Rob?
So,
Rob.
Yeah,
Oh, I forgot.
know,
he wasn't even here, was he? Huh,
No.
I thought he was just being quiet.
That's how forgettable Rob is. But for serious, thank you guys everybody for watching. Please, as always, like, comment, subscribe down below. Check out social media stuff in the description: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, of course. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all later.